I've taken a look at all of the highest owned FPL picks ahead of game week 1 to find a way of beating the FPL template. Hey everyone, Sam here, otherwise known as FPL Pricey, and in today's pre-season video, I've had a look at all of the most popular FPL players at the moment in terms of highest percentage owned, and I'll be breaking down each one individually to see whether or not they're rightfully popular, or maybe there's an advantage that can be taken by going against the template in certain places. Now, this is a brand new graphic setup, so let me know what you think of the new graphics in the comments below. And if you could leave a like or subscribe to the channel, that would be greatly appreciated, especially if you could hit that notification bell, then you won't miss out on any future preseason content. Today's draft is not a traditional FPL draft. You couldn't pick all 15 of these players because it just wouldn't fit into the budget. But what I've done is picked the highest owned players in a legal formation. So by position, I've picked 2 goalkeepers, 5 defenders, 2 of which are on the bench, 5 midfielders, and 3 strikers, 1 of which is on the bench at the moment. Hopefully that makes sense. But basically, all you need to know is I've picked the highest percentage owned players in each position that you can possibly pick in FPL this season. So starting off in goal, Kelleher is by far the highest owned keeper, almost a third of all teams own him right now. Transferred from Liverpool to Brentford over the summer and will be the #1 goalkeeper to replace Flecken. Now, Flecken last season was a decent keeper at 4.5 million, kept a lot of saves, and I don't expect that to necessarily change with Kelleher in goal as well. The only problem with Brentford is they have lost a lot of their core players and their staff as well. Obviously, Thomas Frank and the assistant manager have left. You've also got Norgard, who's gone, the captain. Flecken obviously has gone, therefore making Kelleher the #1. You've also got Mbermo, possibly Wissa out the door as well. So are Brentford going to be significantly worse as a team, enough to make Kelleher not a good pick? I don't personally think so, given that the reason Flecken was a good pick anyway wasn't because of the amount of clean sheets he was keeping. He kept a few, but he wasn't getting the same sort of amount as an Arsenal, Liverpool, Man City. He got a fair few, but it was mainly the save points. And I can still see Kelleher at 4.5 million being good value for money with those save points. The opening set of fixtures aren't awful, and Sunderland in there is probably a good chance for a clean sheet as well. You've got a couple of others, maybe Aston Villa, Chelsea, Fulham, Man United. It's not box office, but it's not terrible. Then after that, all the way through to game week 13 as a set, I would say it's pretty reasonable. You've got Man City and Liverpool both at home. That's obviously not ideal, but 2 bad fixtures in their opening run of 13. Again, you don't really want to be transferring keepers around anyway. So I think Kelleher, as far as 4.5 million goalkeepers go, he's pretty good value for money and probably the 4.5 million that I would choose right now. So I think that's fair enough. Raya is the second highest owned keeper at 5.5 million. Just under 20% of teams own him right now. And I think that maybe that's one where you could take advantage. He's not a bad pick by any means, but what I would say about Raya is, although he's 5.5 million, he doesn't get a lot of save points, and you're really relying on the clean sheets there. So I look at the opening 6 fixtures, and I can't realistically see much more than 2 clean sheets there. Man United away, Leeds at home, that's probably a clean sheet fixture. Liverpool away, Forest at home, Man City at home, Newcastle away. If Arsenal are obviously a great defence, I'm not questioning that whatsoever, so they might keep more clean sheets, but on average, if you played those 6 fixtures 100 times over, I would say on average they probably keep 2 clean sheets in that run. So at 5.5 million, can you find better value elsewhere that could also keep 2 or 3 clean sheets in that opening run and maybe also get some save points for cheaper? I think arguably less. At the same price, you've got Pickford, 5.5 million, that could keep 2 or 3 clean sheets in that opening run as well. You've got Sanchez at 5, you've got Sells at 5, both have decent runs of opening fixtures. I think maybe there's value to be found elsewhere there. Now, that's not to say Raya's a bad pick. I'm not saying that at all, but at 5.5 million, I'm looking at value, and I wonder if there's 0.5 that can be shaved off the goalkeeper there and maybe distributed elsewhere for better effect, especially in those opening 6 game weeks. So I'd say that maybe Raya is one where you could just slightly take an advantage. So moving into defense, and straight away, the 3 most popular defenders in the game are all 6 million defenders, and I think that makes sense as a strategy to have at least 1, maybe even 2 6 million defenders in your team, because that the most you can pay for a defender this season is 6 million anyway. So it gives you that added flexibility if another one pops off and looks like a great FPL asset, which, given there are quite a few high upside defenders at that sort of price point this year, I think that's wise to give you that flexibility. However, the two highest owned right now, Frimpong and Ait-Nouri, I think in previous seasons, I would have said rightly so, no question about it, they are absolutely elite. And to be fair, I don't think they're bad picks now either. I can see the logic behind them being so highly owned. Almost a third of teams own both of them. But what I would say is that the fullbacks have been nerfed a little bit this season because of the defensive contributions being added in. So defensive contributions for defenders, CBIT, so clearances, blocks, interceptions, tackles, you need to get 10 of those a game to get the 2 extra points. Now, fullbacks generally don't make a lot of those individual components to make up the 10 points. There are a few that are exceptions to the rule, but Frimpong and Ait-Nouri aren't usually averaging 10 plus of those a game to get the 2 extra points. So they're still good picks, but I reckon that Frimpong at 6 million, I'd maybe look at Van Dijk as a genuine alternative. Again, at 6 million, I think he's come in underpriced because he's a reliable 90-minute man. He's definitely playing 90 minutes every single week, unless there's an injury, of course. Whereas with Frimpong, I expect him to start every game, but they do still have Connor Bradley there. And is it out of the realms of possibility that Bradley gets some minutes in the Premier League this season? No, not at all. He will probably get minutes unless he goes off on loan. So Frimpong, I expect to be the starter. Do I expect him to start every single game? Probably not, maybe. And if he does, then he becomes an even better pick. But does he get 70, 80, 90 minutes in every single game? Again, I'm reluctant to say confidently he will, but he is an elite player, and at 6 million he's got the attacking pedigree to make a bit of a laughing stock of that price if he's getting 90 minutes every single week. So I get the gamble with the ownership. I think the ownership 30% is based on the fact that his underlying attacking data at Leverkusen was unbelievably good. But I wonder, just that safety net of a Van Dijk, and the same goes for Gvardiol instead of Ait-Nouri, by the way, as well. You get 90 minutes out of them every single week, and playing at centre-back, especially Van Dijk, the defensive contributions they make per match are high enough that you'd expect them to get the average of 2 points extra per game more often than not. And I think over the season, that balances out and makes them a slightly better pick than some of the fullbacks, unless those fullbacks are absolute locks that get 90 minutes and they can repeat the data we've seen before. So Ait-Nouri and Frimpong, not bad picks by any means, but I think 30% ownership is maybe a little bit on the high end. And I would maybe go on the slightly more conservative side generally at the start of the season. And maybe one of those 2 picks could be a centre-back that you know is going to get 90 minutes from the off, has nobody that they're competing with, and is better for the defensive contributions as well. It's just that safety pick. Ait-Nouri, I currently have him in my draft, to be fair, so I'm willing to take a little bit of a gamble on one of them. Ait-Nouri got the most attacking returns for a defender last season in the league, so he's a great pick, but would I be massively shocked if Pep sprung a surprise in the first couple of game weeks and benched him? Not really. And then also, if you've got Gvardiol, who's an absolute lock at centre-back, and if Ait-Nouri's not playing, he could also go to left-back, he'll get some more defensive contribution points this season as well. At the same price point, is there an argument to maybe just go on the safe side as well? So I like both of them, don't get me wrong, but I think maybe on at least one of those 2, it might be wise to just pick the safer player for now. And I think you also might see yourself getting more points out of those safer players to begin with too. That, again, not to say they're bad picks. I think they're just maybe a little bit too high on the ownership. Gabriel, another centre-back that I really like the look of. Now, the problem with Arsenal defence is they don't actually get those defensive contribution points all that often because they're usually so far advanced. They don't need to make a lot of tackles, interceptions, blocks. Not really that many clearances either because they play out from the back pretty well. So Gabriel is a solid pick at 6 million. Great in the air, great from set pieces, and he might get the odd defensive contribution. But I've already talked about it with Raya. I don't necessarily expect too many clean sheets in the opening 6 game weeks. If you're planning on wildcarding late and maybe holding Arsenal long term and holding on to Gabriel for 10 plus game weeks, and it starts to make more sense. But I think over a quarter of teams owning him to begin with, given that most managers will probably end up wildcarding in the first 7 or 8 game weeks, I don't know if you're going to get the best out of him in those 7 or 8 game weeks, given the fixtures. So I love him as a pick. Obviously, I've got great memories owning him, but I do wonder if now is the right time to own him from the start. So on all 3, I've not really got massive problems with any of them, but I think they're just slightly overexposed. And I think that maybe there are better value picks elsewhere, or picks at the same price that you can probably get more security out of to begin with. You can also look at the 5.5 million defenders as well, like a Munoz too, who will get the attacking returns that you'll get out of a Night Nuri or a Frimpong, but he's absolutely nailed for 90 minutes and gets a few defensive contributions as well. Onto the bench, two 4.5 millions. You've got Wan-Bissaka and Konza, both of which are currently in my game week 1 draft. So I've got 3 out of the 5 defenders right now. Wan-Bissaka and Konza, I think the reason that they're both so popular is because they rotate pretty well together, and they're both coming in at 4.5 million. So they're a cheap rotation pair. I wouldn't expect to start either of them every single game week, but if you've got them in a rotation, I think it works perfectly well. Aston Villa are a decent defence. Konza obviously represents good value for money in that defence as a player who gets 90 minutes every single week, but don't go expecting too many defensive contributions from him. In fact, despite the fact he is a centre-back, he was actually ranking pretty low on those last season. Wan-Bissaka was a bit of a cheat code in the second half of last season. West Ham are not an elite defence and not as good as Aston Villa, but they've got a fair few decent games in the first few game weeks. And I think at 4.5 million, he's one of the better, if not best, cheap defenders that you can possibly own to begin with. So obviously good game week 1 fixture. If you go across to the fixture ticker from FPL team, Sunderland first game week, and then no terrible fixtures all the way through to game week 7. Then you've got a nice patch after that as well through to game week 11. So again, you're not starting him every single game week, but if you're starting him in roughly 50% of those matches in combination with Konza, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think you get, is it 3 promoted clubs in the opening 7 game weeks if you combine the 2's fixtures? I don't think that's that bad whatsoever. So I'm willing to accept that Wan-Bissaka and Konza are part of the template for a reason. I've got them in my team, but that's not to say other 4.5 million options can't be good options. You've got plenty of other great options out there. So there, again, might be advantages to be taken at 4.5 million, but I don't hate either Wan-Bissaka or Konza as picks, and I can't really suggest you shouldn't have them considering I've currently got them myself. So moving into the midfield, you've got some really template picks there as well. Salah, Palmer and Wirtz, all owned by north of a third of the game. Salah owned by more than half and Palmer just under. Those 3 I'm seeing popping up in a lot of teams and quite often in combination. So all 3 of them in one draft at a time. Now, Liverpool's opening fixtures, you've got Newcastle and Arsenal in there, but as a set of 6, they actually look pretty good. So you've got Bournemouth at home, who have lost a lot of their defensive options this season. New goalkeeper, lost Kirkez, have lost Hoyson as well, maybe losing Zabani. So that's not a bad fixture to attack. Newcastle, Arsenal, that makes it look like a poor start. But after that, Burnley, Everton, Crystal Palace, you're going to want some Liverpool exposure there. And Salah, especially because he's so reliable at the start of seasons and, let's face it, throughout the season, he's going to be a good captain no matter what the fixture is. And Bournemouth at home seems like a very reasonable time to be putting the armband on him. Realistically, you're not going to want to miss out on him against Burnley or Everton or Palace either. So I think it makes a lot of sense that he is in over 50% of teams. If anything, I'm a little bit surprised he's not slightly higher owned, and every time I look at that percentage owned figure, it is creeping up. So it was about 55% yesterday, and I had to update this graphic this morning before recording because he's jumped up another 2%. So Salah is creeping up there as the template teams that have been like selected to begin with are, so I literally the template 15 that you're given automatically, they're being moved around and people are starting to actually pick their preferred 15. Salah is creeping up in ownership because of that, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him at 65-70% come the deadline. Now, is there a way to maybe go against Salah? Absolutely. Like, you could, Haaland's not in the template right now. He's obviously an elite pick in his own right, 14 million, and that would break up the template instantly. And Man City's fixtures at the start of the season are not bad either. You've got Burnley in there in game week 6 too. You've got Wolves, Tottenham, Brighton, Man United as an opening set of 4, not bad whatsoever. Yes, Arsenal in 5 is not ideal, but that set all the way through to game week 8 is actually looking pretty decent, by which point most of us will have probably hit the wild card anyway, realistically. So you could look at going against Salah and maybe building a draft with Haaland, which will inherently be much more differential and break up the template massively because you'll have well, you'll go without the most popular captain for probably 3 or 4 of the opening 6 game weeks. And Haaland won't be in a lot of teams because Salah is so expensive as well. So that would break it up altogether. And you probably end up with a whole different set of picks elsewhere, just as a chain reaction. So I don't hate going against Salah, but do it with a word of warning that Salah does get off to a hot start more often than not. I think he's got 3 or 4 good fixtures in the opening 6. And just because he's got Newcastle and Arsenal in there, I think if you take a slightly longer view, it makes a lot of sense why he's in so many drafts right now. And he's absolutely going to be my game week 1 captain. I think he'll be a lot of people's. So if you're going against him, then you might need a big sofa to hide behind. However, that is also where the most gains can be made. And if you want to get off to a hot start, 1 or 2 risks might pay off. And if Salah blanks in the first couple of game weeks, you've gone without him, you could be off to an absolute flyer and it'll be pretty hard to catch you from the off. So it's all about your attitude to risk, but Salah is popular for a very good reason. So going against him would take a lot of guts. Wirtz and Palmer, I haven't found a draft that I absolutely love with both of them in just yet, because I think that obviously takes up another, 19 million of your budget. If you go with Salah as well, that is a massive amount of money to be paying on just 3 players. And I would prefer to distribute my funds just a little bit across the board. Now, Wirtz and Palmer, both great picks in their own right. I think Wirtz, we've already talked about Liverpool's fixtures. Do you want to double up on Liverpool midfield, given those fixtures? I think the game weeks 2 and 3 might put you off a little bit. And I do wonder, considering he's a new player to the league and his data last season was with penalties included, will he take a little bit of time to get going? Will his minutes improve after a few game weeks time when he integrates? Will his data improve after a few game weeks? I think so, possibly. But is he a great pick to begin with? I think if he came in at 9.5, 10 million, I would be much quicker to say, just go without him to begin with and get over to him once the fixtures turn after game week 3. But that 8.5 does make it very tempting. So I can completely understand why he's owned by so many players. And it's that shiny new toy thing where you've got a new player to the league. He's undoubtedly a world-class player as well, fitting into a very popular team and a very good attack. So he will get goals, he will get assists, and at 8.5 million, I think that is good value for money. It's just whether or not he's good enough value for money to begin with to maybe forego spreading that money around elsewhere. So can I get more points out of spreading the funds, out of either Palmer or Wirtz? I think so personally, but I do still want at least one of them in my draft. Right now, I've got Palmer. He's owned by 50% of teams, and I basically just want at least a Chelsea attacker given the opening run of fixtures. There's a couple of not so great fixtures in there, but as a general trend, the opening 12 are actually really nice. You've got Crystal Palace, West Ham, Fulham as an opening 3. That is probably slightly better than Liverpool's anyway. He's on penalties too, which Wirtz doesn't have the benefit of. And for that extra 2 million, I've got the guarantee of minutes. I've got the guarantee of the data in the Premier League. So he's a proven asset on penalties, on set pieces, and is a talismanic figure for Chelsea. And it also diversifies my team just a little bit more, rather than all of the eggs or a few more eggs into the Liverpool basket. If Liverpool have an off day against Newcastle or Arsenal and Wirtz or Salah don't return, at least I'm not overly exposed to them. Whereas if I diversify a little bit, Palmer in there as well, I'm just a little bit more comfortable. Also, having Palmer in as a bit of a placeholder for that 10 to 10.5 million price point is probably a safer way of playing it in my view, because if Wirtz gets off to a really hot start in the first 3 game weeks, you can hop across Palmer to Wirtz very easily in game week 4 ahead of Burnley without having to use 2 or 3 free transfers because Wirtz is cheaper. Same goes for Saka as well. And there are loads of other midfielders that you can jump across to from Palmer very quickly. Given that he's got penalties, given that he's a 90-minute man, I think it makes sense that he's in a lot of teams. 50% does seem high, and I do wonder if the combination of all 3 of them is maybe the template that I try to avoid, because I'd like to diversify funds just a little bit and spread it across the 15. If you spend all that money in just those 3 positions, I think it can be a little bit top heavy, and maybe you haven't gotten the most out of other positions. But that's not to say I haven't seen drafts that I like with those 3 in it. So by all means, go ahead if that's what you prefer. And I will be exploring other drafts in the next few weeks that I'm sure will tempt me to have Wirtz in alongside Palmer, or Wirtz instead of Palmer as well. So again, great picks, but maybe a little bit high on the ownership for Wirtz out of the two, possibly Palmer as well. But as a combination, I think maybe just slightly overexposed. Moving across to the final two midfielders, Kudus and Rodgers. I'll start with Kudus. Over 25% of teams own him currently. And this is one where I would maybe contest the template slightly. Now, I will say first and foremost, I really like Kudus as a player. I think he's a fantastic player in real life. But as an FPL pick, I'm still yet to be totally convinced. Now, on the plus side, he's got his move to Tottenham, and Spurs aren't going to spend that sort of money to bench him, realistically. And I would also imagine that Thomas Frank has picked him out very early on, saying, I want this player because he can transform my team and I can get the most out of him. But does that mean he's going to be an amazing FPL asset? Well, he doesn't have penalties, or at least it's very, very unlikely he does. And last season at West Ham, I think he got 8 attacking returns, possibly 9. The season before that, not blockbuster in terms of attacking returns either. And the underlying attacking data has never been that special. Now, do I expect it to improve at Tottenham? Yes, probably. But he seems to me like more of a chance creator and a dribbler and a ball progressor than someone who's going to be on the end of chances consistently. And we've seen this so many times before in FPL where a team has signed a ridiculously good player, but that it just doesn't quite translate to FPL points. And I do expect him at 6.5 million to be decent value. I think that he should be in some teams, but to be this highly owned so early on after we've seen one preseason friendly with him in it, we don't know for sure what his role is going to be in the team just yet. We can't be completely sold on his minutes given the amount of midfield options that they've got in the team. I do expect him to start most weeks, in fact, probably every single week, but can he get brought off early? Absolutely, yes. And are we certain the data is going to tick up to 0.5, 0.6 per 90 in terms of XGI? I'm not sure it will. I think it will tick up a bit, but his data last season was nowhere near that of an FPL asset that I would consider personally. So all I'm saying, I guess, is I'm willing to be proven wrong, and I've got an open mind on Kudus, but I don't think I'm convinced enough to go with him from the off. I think I'd want to see him in a starting formation for Spurs and see what he's capable of before jumping onto him, because I want to see that data improve. I want to see his position. I want to see those minutes all locked in before selecting him as an FPL asset. Now, that game week 1 fixture against Burnley is obviously really tempting, and I can see why so many managers are selecting him because of that fixture. Spurs fixtures also, by the way, afterwards are not too bad either. Man City's not great, but after that, they've got a great run all the way through to game week 12. So more than happy to own him for that entire stretch, to be fair. But I think a large proportion of managers are picking him just because of that game week 1 fixture against Burnley, hoping to get off to a hot start. I don't have a problem with that, but unless you're planning on wildcarding early, I'd probably just look at the whole stretch and say, is he the best 6.5 million in that entire stretch? Or am I confident he's the best 6.5 million in that entire stretch to begin with? He could be, but I'm still willing to wait on him at time of recording and just say, you know what, there are other 6.5s, maybe 7 million assets I'm just slightly more convinced on and slightly more confident in the minutes, the data, all of the above. And I can jump across to Kudus in a few game weeks time once I've seen all of those boxes ticked and he's getting the minutes, he's getting the data, he's fitting into a system that I like. I just want to see that in real life in the Premier League before going there, I think. But he's a good player, obviously a great player in real life. I just don't massively get the hype to have him at over 25% ownership just yet. But I know a lot of people disagree with me, and that's absolutely fine. Let me know in the comments below if you do, and more than happy to have a debate on it. And again, I'm not saying he's a bad pick whatsoever. I just think it's maybe slightly oversubscribed right now. Rodgers is number 5, 20% of teams, so 1 in 5 managers own him. And again, the data last season wasn't electric. It was, I think, 0.34 XGI per 90, Villa's fixtures are pretty good though, in fairness. So all the way through to game week 9, they have got a pretty good run. Newcastle's not an easy day 1 fixture, but after that, I actually really like the run between game week 2 and game week 8. So I do want some Aston Villa coverage if at all possible. And okay, yes, Rodgers has had a price hike and he won't be as good value for money as he was last season, especially if he replicates the same data as he did last season. But he's a young player. He gets 90 minutes every single week, and he was undoubtedly one of the players that Emery was most confident in last season, despite the fact that he was very young and just getting involved in the team for the first time. So this season is a huge year for him. I expect the data to tick upwards again. I also expect that run of fixtures to be good for FPL points for Villa assets generally. So if I can't get to someone like Ollie Watkins at 9 million, I still kind of think that Rodgers at 7 million is good value for money. 20% owned is pretty high though. And I do also wonder if one of the Bournemouth assets at 6 or 7% ownership respectively for Cliver and Semenyo, who both put up better XGI data per 90 than Rodgers did last season. I wonder if maybe that's a template breaker that you could also implement and take a gamble against Rodgers to begin with, because he is owned by a fair chunk of teams. And Bournemouth's opening run, okay, Liverpool in game week 1 is not great, but it kind of matches Villa's after that. They don't have the promoted clubs as often. They've got Leeds instead of Burnley and Sunderland, so they got 1 instead of 2. But as a general run, that's not too bad. And Bournemouth's attacking data was very similar to Villa's last year. And Semenyo and Cliver were both better in terms of their underlying data than Rodgers himself too. So I like Rodgers as a pick. He's actually in my game week 1 side right now. But given he's pretty highly owned, I wonder if you wanted to go differential, that's somewhere that maybe you could break apart the template slightly and maybe look at one of those Bournemouth midfielders who do have slightly better data than Rodgers. So finally, moving on to the strikers. And I think this is the part of the template that you could probably have the most fun with and go against the most easily. I also think it's the part that will break apart the most before game week 1. Now, first up, you've got Joao Pedro, who's currently owned by the most players in FPL right now. 60.5% ownership. That's higher than Mo Salah. So he's the most owned player out of the entire player pool. And I do think that this is slightly overcooking it. He's a good player, do not get me wrong. And at 7.5 million as a striker, he could be incredible value for money for Chelsea. But I do still have question marks over him. Partly, he does have a bit of an injury record. He's also not absolutely nailed into that starting 11 just yet. And a lot of Chelsea fans will probably be commenting right now saying, how dare you say that? Of course, he's the part of the starting 11. He's absolutely essential to us. He'll get 90 minutes every match. However, you do have a lot of quality players. You've got Delap, who you've also signed, who won't be getting no minutes. And if Joao Pedro plays up front, which given what he did in the Club World Cup looks pretty likely, Delap will steal minutes off of him at times. He hasn't come in to get no minutes. And we already saw it in the Club World Cup. Delap coming on for the last 20, 30 minutes and doing a really fantastic job as well. So that doesn't necessarily mean Joao Pedro is the one that gets subbed off, but sometimes he will be. Sometimes he'll move back and go right wing, left wing, set like Cam as well instead. But he won't be an absolute lock for 90 minutes week in, week out. The data last season was good, but that was also including penalties for Brighton. And I believe he only got 5 or 6 open play goals last season. So is he a striker that you can rely on getting 20 goals? Probably not. At 7.5 million, he doesn't need to be either, to be fair. And Chelsea's opening run of fixtures, as discussed with Palmer, is very tempting. However, I think at 7.5 million, there are better, more convincing strikers to look at who do have penalties, who you can rely on getting 90 minutes and match up the data to Joao Pedro pretty well. That's not to say Joao Pedro can't be a fantastic pick at some points. And given the price point, I can see him being in my team at some point this season. But a bit like Kudus, I'm willing to wait and see, I think, before jumping on him. I need to see that he's getting 70, 80 minutes minimum a match. I need to see what position he's actually playing as well, because if he's actually playing on the right wing or left wing instead of up front, then you've got yourself an out of position player in reverse who's classified as a striker instead of a midfielder, but playing in midfield, yet not getting the extra point for the goal that a midfielder would get or the clean sheet point, and he won't get defensive contributions either. So look, I don't think he's a bad pick. Again, 7.5 million is very good value for money if he's getting 80 plus minutes every single match. But I'm not completely convinced that he's an absolute lock in that Chelsea 11 just yet. And I think he might get subbed off early sometimes as well. So without penalties, with that slight doubt, I think 60.5% ownership is quite high. I think that's on the high side. And that may be somewhere that you could break apart the template with other 7.5 million strikers, or even slightly cheaper as well, that do have penalties, that do have good data, who do have the minutes. Alexander Isak is another one that I think will drop in ownership pretty quickly. We've just got news this morning that he's backed out of the pre-season tour of Singapore for Newcastle. So he's nursing a little bit of an injury. Some people will speculate that that's because of an impending transfer. But as far as we know right now, he's going to be a Newcastle player come game week 1. But given that the transfer window is still open, so there is a possibility he leaves, and the fact that he is potentially nursing an injury, I think 40% ownership is very high right now. Newcastle's opening fixtures aren't crazy good by any means, so that's not another thing that I would be hanging my hat on and saying I must pick a Newcastle attacker. Aston Villa, Liverpool, Leeds is a good fixture, Wolves is a good fixture, then Bournemouth, Arsenal, Nottingham Forest. It's not blockbuster good, and at 10.5 million you're really competing him with the likes of a Palmer, a Wirtz, a Saka as well, maybe a Gyökeres if he comes to the league, a Haaland possibly as well at only 3.5 million more. So he really needs to be notching goals every single week or most weeks to make that good value for money. So first off, he could be injured. Second off, there could be transfer speculation. And third, has he got the fixtures to match up with that price point to begin with? I'm not sure he does. And I think if you're going with Isak, you probably can't go with that second premium midfielder. And I would want at least one of Wirtz or Palmer in my game week 1 side, or potentially Saka if you wanted to captain him in game week 2. Having all three of those alongside Salah, of course, is going to be very difficult. So I think Isak's the one that I'd probably sacrifice for now, given the speculation, given the injury, and given the price point with the fixtures too. So I think those two, João Pedro and Isak, could be less popular come game week 1, and you can find better value elsewhere, potentially at 7.5 or 7 million. Bowen is another one that at 20% ownership is, I don't think is a bad pick, but given that he won't get as many points as a striker as he did as a midfielder last season, you obviously get less points for goals. You won't get the clean sheet points either. I think he was due to get around 20 less points last season if he was classified as a forward rather than a striker. And Bowen sometimes often gets played out on the wing as well. So a bit of a reverse out of position potentially at times as well. 8 million. I don't think it's a terrible pick. I have toyed around with having him in my game week 1 side, mainly for that game week 1 fixture against, is it Sunderland? Yeah, Sunderland. After that, I think once Sunderland's out of the way, is it that great? It's not bad. I obviously talked up Wan-Bissaka earlier, but that was more in a rotation with an Aston Villa player. With Bowen, you'd want to start him every single week. And if you're looking at every single week here, you've got to play him against Chelsea, Nottingham Forest, both good defences last season. Tottenham, probably a bit tighter this season. Crystal Palace, Everton, good defence. Arsenal, good defence. All the way through to Liverpool in game week 13. I don't think it's standout good. It's not awful by any means, but again, he's slightly more expensive. He's sometimes playing slightly out of position as well. I think there are cheaper strikers that I prefer to begin with. So at over 20% ownership, I think that maybe he's someone you could possibly go against. So yeah, the strikers, the 3 strikers here, I think are the part of the template I'd probably break up the most. But none of the players I've talked about today are awful picks, by the way. They've all got good reasons why they're part of the template. But if you want to get ahead in FPL, you're going to have to bet against some of these players. So hopefully what I've done today is given you food for thought and made you think, okay, maybe this player is someone that maybe I could bet against for a little period of time. Maybe this player is someone that I'm absolutely locked in on. There's no way I'm compromising on him. So there are a few of those for me in this 15, of course. But let me know in the comments below which players that currently aren't part of this template you're most highly considering, and which ones do you think here are most over-owned or too highly owned, and maybe you're willing to take a little bit of a bet against come game week 1. Be really interested to know what your thoughts are on that. And if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell as well. I'd really, really appreciate it. I'll see you next time as we keep preparing for game week 1.